Good morning. Welcome to the King Institute for Faith and Culture and our convocation this morning. This is our last scheduled convo. We do have, however, awards convocation on April 15th, so bear that in mind. You do have another CCS opportunity on the 15th in the morning here. Many of you will be receiving awards, so I hope you're here for that. And then on the evening of April 15th, as well as April 14th, we have another opportunity if you're finding yourself short, but also if you want to make your life better. And the evening of April 14th at Lee Street Baptist, mezzo-soprano Andrea Baker will be doing a program on civil rights in Alabama. She's in the process of doing her 4th radio documentary for BBC in Scotland. She and my sister-in-law do these programs, and they're traveling to Alabama right after this. I'll do a program at 7 o'clock in the evening at Lee Street, if you're interested in that. The following evening, she does her program, Sing, Sister, Sing, which is a history of African-American women's voice. That will be at First Presbyterian Church at 7. Every year in Edinburgh, Scotland, there's a thing called the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which has about 5,000 arts acts of various kinds. And hers was named one of the top 10 last year, which is top 10 out of 5,000 is pretty good. So Andrea is going to be at 7 o'clock at First Pres on the 15th. So you do have a couple more things left after this morning. To introduce Noah, though, I'm going to hand it off to Wendy Traynor, a 6'7" forward from Georgia.
Yeah, that's it. Good morning. So there aren't many people in the world who can claim to be both a mathematician and a physicist. And those who are some of the greatest minds that we have. And some of them you're familiar with: Albert Einstein, Isaac Newton, even Andy Simonson, Dr. Simonson, true. But another one that joins this great list is our student lecturer this year, Noah Rosenbalm. There are many similarities between these great minds and these great mathematicians and physicists, between Noah and some of the greats. Some of it is what they spend their time thinking about and researching and doing. This is a topic of some of Noah's important research. Things the average person probably doesn't think about. Much like Einstein or Isaac Newton. But likewise, Albert Einstein in particular was known to be a little bit forgetful, probably because his brain was filled with other things. And so some of those similarities exist between those great minds and our speaker this morning. Just goes with the territory. Art is another thing that a lot of people don't attribute to mathematicians, but there's a lot of examples of great math and art that go together, and these are some of the works of some of the great mathematicians and artists that we all know. Noah is an artist as well, and these are things that people don't realize that I'm glad I had the opportunity to bring to light. So it is something that is rare and valuable. But these are things that, this is really where the similarities end, I would say. Noah is an avid sports fan, unlike probably many mathematicians and physicists, and he's knowledgeable about all types of sports, and it's a little bit where his intelligence will show lacking, and the only way is that you know that is because he is a Green Bay Packers fan. So that's where there's a flaw in his intelligence, but other than that, and that happens to be where his topic takes him. But Noah is, we are fortunate in that Noah really does have a heart for service, and that's true. And many of you in this room have benefited from that, from his tutoring, both in math and physics. It's not unusual to see Noah surrounded by 6 or 7 students, and he is just captivating them with how to work calculus problems. And so we're fortunate to have him here for that reason. He's also passionate about coaching. Noah wants to help people. He's got a heart for service, and it really is truly a calling for him. He's a devoted friend, and he's a devoted family member. His love for his family is evident anytime that you see him helping his sister with Algebra 2 or just communicating about and with his parents, both of whom are here today, his mom Elizabeth and his dad Wes. So without further delay, I bring you our speaker today, Noah Rosenbalm.
Am I on? Okay. Thank you for that introduction, Professor Trainer. She makes a point to tell me every time she sees the pictures that I draw that she feels disgust and hatred. And I always respond with, well, art elicits emotion. I consider disgust and hatred emotion, therefore what I draw is art, and I am an artist. Yes, and you know, she knocks my Green Bay, me being a fan of the Packers, as you know, as a knock on my intelligence, but she's an Atlanta Falcons fan, so I mean, do with that what you will. Before I get started, I'd like to thank the King Institute for Faith and Culture, as well as the faculty and the professors for giving me an opportunity to get up here and talk with you all this morning. Talk with you all about stuff that I'm actually passionate about. It's an honor, and I'm grateful to be here. So start off by thanking them. And then when I was looking at choosing a topic for this, they gave you a little piece of paper that gives you kind of like guidelines almost. And it said it doesn't have to be theological in nature. It can be about your major. It can be about something that you've learned in your major. And I personally, I'm very passionate about math and physics. I love math and physics. Seeing how the world is explained through math and physics is fascinating to me. But I've tutored enough of my peers to know that that sentiment is not shared. A lot of times I feel like I'm the only one that feels like that. So in an effort to kind of make this a little more entertaining, I guess, or digestible or enjoyable to you all, I decided not to talk about math and physics predominantly. Instead, focus on what I've learned from coaching high school basketball. So I thought back to a couple previous student lectures, and one actually last spring was Sam Barker. He's one of my good friends, and he talked about telling your story. He talked about why we should tell our story, because you never know who it might impact and who might benefit from it. So I figured that's probably a good place to start. So I'll tell a little bit about my story, and then what I've learned from this small little part. So I graduated from Tri-Cities Christian Schools in 2015. I chose to come to King because of the small class sizes. I liked the small student-teacher ratio because I graduated from a smaller school. I had the opportunity to play, King gave me the opportunity to play basketball on the JV team, or the developmental team. They've called it so many things since I've been here. I think when I was here when I played it was JV. So I ended up not playing my freshman year, played my sophomore year. And in an effort to kind of get back in shape after taking a year off, I went back to Tri-Cities summer practices to just participate in drills and scrimmage and things like that, trying to knock off some rust and get back in shape. And while I was there, I would give small little tips, small little pointers to some of the guys who were still playing. Nothing big, something like, you got to be quicker if you want to make this move, or maybe have this position if you want to make this move, little things like that. But at the end of the summer, the head varsity coach and the JV coach at the time asked if I wanted to come on and be an assistant to both the JV and the varsity. And so I went to Coach Blair, who was the coach of King's JV team at the time, and we worked it out to where I could kind of go back and forth and do both, which is another benefit of going to a school like King. They give you a lot of freedom to do that. So I was assistant JV and assistant varsity that first year, and then after that, The JV coach ended up stepping down, so they moved me to the JV role. So I decided to not play anymore and focus more instead on coaching. So I've been doing that for the past 2 years, a total of 3 years. Coaching. So forgot the clicker. So it's taught me a lot. I hope that I'm teaching them, and they're teaching me just as much as we're going through it. So one of the first things I learned, like right off the bat, was that each one of these young men is defined so much by their successes and their failures. And a lot of times it's more so their failures than it is their successes. So the successes, they revel in those, they enjoy those, but it's the failures that tend to linger. It's the failures that tend to kind of hang around and they fester. And more specifically, it's not really even what I would consider a failure, especially as a coach. It's not what I would consider a failure. It's what they define as a failure. So a good example of this is we'll have a young man that we put in the game. He plays 2 or 3 minutes, and within like the first couple offensive possessions, he takes a shot and he misses the shot. And it could be a good shot, it could be a bad shot, but for whatever reason he misses it. So he comes out of the game, right? And he sits next to me, and I want to talk to him about something else, maybe something else that he needs to fix on defense, or he's watching when a shot goes up, he's not rebounding. And the first thing he says to me is, "Man, I can't believe I missed that shot." I'm like, I don't even remember the shot that you took, but you're consumed by it, right? So they define missing that shot. They define not hitting that shot as a failure, whereas as a coach, we define different things. Like, yes, you probably should have hit that shot, but that's not what I want you to focus on. That's not what I want you to kind of dial in on when you're here, right? So it festers, right? And it's their definition of failure. And so then they'll usually take it a step farther and define, like total points scored at the end of a game, right? That's a big one for them, is if they score a lot of points, they consider it a success. If they don't score a lot of points, they consider it a failure. So they could play a really good game for us, and they could really help us on defense. They could really like pull down some big rebounds and stuff, but they score 6 points, or they score 4 points, or maybe they don't score at all. Maybe it's just the offense isn't coming their way, or maybe they're just having a rough shooting night, but their defensive effort wins us the game. But they still consider that game a failure because they didn't score a lot of points. So it's what they define as failure. It's not necessarily what we would define as failures, but it's what they define as a failure. So they'll attach almost their sense of self, or sometimes their sense of worth, to how many points they scored. And it's not uncommon for high school kids to do that, especially in sports, but that's part of our job as coaches, is we want to kind of separate them from the stat sheet, right? That's not indicative of who they are as a person, or who they are as a player. And so one thing that we try to stress is we say, let your confidence dictate your play, don't let your play dictate your confidence. So if your play is dictating your confidence, right, you have a bad game and your confidence is torpedoed. Right? You have no confidence in your abilities. You really don't have confidence in yourself. Whereas if your confidence inspires your play, you can have a bad game, but that's not going to affect how you view yourself, or your confidence in who you are, or your abilities. So this was like one of the very first things I learned, was that every single one of them is defined by successes and failures, but more often it's failures, and it's their definition of failures. So you kind of got to do a little bit of damage control when it comes to maybe redefining how they see failure, what they define as failure, or just completely moving it away, like trying to separate confidence and stuff like that from stat sheets and from how you play. And so that was a big one. The second thing I learned pretty quickly is that each one of them is a sponge. And what I mean by that is they'll soak up everything. They don't always utilize what they soak up, but they'll soak up everything. They'll soak up idle comments that you make, your tone of voice when you say something, your body language. I mean, if you're complaining about the refs, they're going to complain about the refs. They will soak up everything. And an example of this is I kind of learned this the hard way. So we were playing a game. I don't remember who we were playing, but we were better. I felt that we were better than what we were presenting. I felt that we were better than what we were putting on the floor, right? We weren't playing up to how I know we could have played. And I was frustrated, and I kind of slouched on the bench, was staring off at off into La La Land, and it looked like I was trying to think of how we could try to turn this around, maybe how we can push them to play a little bit better. But to them, it looked like I had kind of just quit. I'd given up, right? Because it was horrible body language. It was negative body language. And I happened to look down the bench later on, and 4 or 5 of them are doing the exact same thing I'm doing, right? And it doesn't really matter why I was doing it. They just see the negative body language, and they're like, oh, well, coach is doing it. Coach is giving up, so I'm going to give up. It's okay for me to do it. So they soak up everything. And what I found is they're very eager, and they will, if you set a low standard, they don't really hesitate to sink to that standard. They will gladly complain about the refs because it takes responsibility off of, them or us as a team. They'll gladly sink to that standard. If you set a low standard, they'll sink to it. So as coaches, we have to be very intentional and be very active about presenting a high standard to these young men, because we know that they're going to soak up everything. So we want to present things like we want to drive growth, execution, vision, and things like that, because the hope is that if we are constantly presenting that high standard, then they will eventually rise to that standard. They'll soak that up, and they'll rise to that standard as they go through our program, because what you present is what they're going to emulate. And I've been a part of teams, and I've played against teams where the coaches don't necessarily present a fantastic example, and it's emulated through the rest of the team, and you can tell. And I've played teams, and I've been part of teams where the coach presents a fantastic example, and you can tell. So they'll soak it up. They will soak up everything that you do, and you have to be intentional about keeping that standard high. Now, I said earlier they'll soak it up. They don't always utilize it. We tell our guys, when you're shooting a layup or something, or shooting a shot close to the basket, you want to put it high on the backboard. It's going to give you the greatest chance of making that shot. And we say it till we're blue in the face. But a lot of times, they're not going to necessarily. You don't see them utilizing that in a game. And so it seems like they're not listening. But there was one Saturday, we had a Saturday morning game, and the middle school boys team had practice after we did, so I stayed after to make sure the equipment and the keys and stuff got handed off to the middle school coach. And while I was waiting on her to show up, I pulled out a basketball and shot a layup, didn't put it high on the backboard, and I missed it. And every single one of them that was in the gym, that was still there, started yelling, put it high on the backboard, coach, put it high on the backboard. And I'm like, okay, like, you're hearing me. Like, I know you're listening, and you're hearing what I'm saying, you're just choosing not to do it. So, they'll soak everything up, they don't always utilize it. But it goes back to keeping that high standard in what you present to them. And on a lighter note, each one of them has an incredibly short attention span. It's incredible sometimes. We were on the van ride or the bus ride to one of the games at States this past year, and one of our guys asked the varsity coach if the two teams we were about to go watch, if they had met in the regular season. And the varsity coach paused for about 2 or 3 seconds and said, and was about to answer. But by the time he was about to answer, the young man who had asked the question was already in another conversation about something that had just happened outside the window. And it was almost like he didn't even ask a question. I mean, he was just on to the next thing like that. I mean, it was comical. Like, I mean, I was astounded. Like, it's almost like he forgot he asked a question. So, in pre-games, in post-games, and even timeouts, even, like, you'll see them. Like, I'll be talking, I'll be going over strategies, going over something that we needed to fix, or just breaking down the game in general. And half of them are going to be staring at the ceiling, or like looking off at the wall, or looking down at their shoes. Like, they're just not, and this is like in game. Like, during timeouts, like, I don't have everyone's full attention, and it's the 5 that are on the floor. It's just, the attention spans is just so short. And so what I found is if I want something to stick, right, it's got to grab their attention. So we had an issue this year with, we would get the ball in the paint, either on a post move, offensive rebound, you just drive it in there, and they would fade away when they take the shot. And we kept telling them, don't fade away. You're making it easier for the guy who's guarding you to block that shot. Don't fade away. Go up strong. And we said it, and we said it, and we said it, and they didn't do it. And I went home one night, I was frustrated, and I was trying to figure out, how can I present this differently to them? How can I get it to where that's going to grab their attention? So I was looking through some of the resources that I had, and I was looking through a book called Stuff Good Players Should Know. And one of the little blurbs in there was talking about how when you get the ball in the paint, don't fade away, but take it straight up through the nostrils of the guy you're guarding. And he called that nostril time. And so I said, okay, let's try that. So I took it to the JV team, the next game we had, and I said, guys, when you get the ball in the paint, it's nostril time. And they laughed, but they didn't know what to do with that. Because, coach is up there saying something like incredibly off the wall and saying it's nostril time when you get the ball in the paint. But it worked. So when they get the ball in the paint and they've got the coaches on the bench jumping up and down screaming, it's nostril time, it's nostril time, and they got guys up and down the bench screaming, it's nostril time, then it sticks, right? Because if we're over there screaming, be strong, that doesn't stand out as much, but if we're screaming, it's nostril time, they're going to go strong. They're going to, and it worked. Like we started shooting better in the paint. And like our shooting percentage in the paint actually skyrocketed because we quit fading away, right? So it's got to grab their attention, right? It's really got to grab their attention if you want it to stick. And this one seems self-explanatory. It wasn't to me when I started. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So each young man that comes to the program and that I've had the privilege of coaching handles things a little bit differently. And they process things a little bit differently. And you have to kind of figure out what makes each one tick. So can you call out this player in front of the team, or do you have to take them aside and handle it that way? Can you use constructive criticism with them, or do you have to find a way to kind of circumvent that? So a lot of times I found that if you make it personal, they're more likely to respond. And a great example of this is we had a guy 2 years ago who was always in his own head. He was, I guess, just worried about he was defined by his failures and what he defined as a failure, but he was always in his own head. And so in an attempt to kind of get him out of that, we started calling him by his middle name. Pre-game, during the game, and post-game, we started calling him by his middle name, me and my assistant coach. And it was amazing. For whatever reason, that worked. For whatever reason, he started playing really well, and he wasn't in his own head a lot when we were calling him by his middle name. And I don't know why that worked. I have no clue why that worked, but it did. And it's all about finding the right buttons to press, and then pressing those buttons, trying to motivate them, trying to push them to be better. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. So a couple miscellaneous lessons I've learned before. I've got some pictures I'm going to show you of teams, but a couple miscellaneous lessons is, as a coach, I'm ultra competitive. I'm extremely competitive, and I want to win everything. And as a coach, you can kind of become consumed by that. So they remind me a lot to not take it too seriously. It's high school basketball after all. I'm there to grow them as young men and to try to move them along in their maturity process, right? Not pad the win column, not make myself look like a great coach, right? It's more than that, right? I'm there for them. I'm not there for wins and losses. So that teaches me don't take the game too seriously. They are awful at trying to discern how old somebody is. The first year that I started helping, the first year that my sophomore year, I was 19 years old, and I turned 20 during the season. And so on my birthday, one of the JV coach wished me happy birthday. The JV coach at the time wished me happy birthday. And one of the freshmen said, Coach, how old are you? And I was just curious to see what he thought. And I didn't have a beard or anything, but I looked young. And I said, well, how old do you think I am? And he looked at me and he said, 30. I was like, it didn't offend me, but I was like, how are you so wrong? That's 10 years off, man. And I think he could tell from my facial expression that he was wrong. So he said, 25. I'm like, you're closer, but you're still pretty far off. He was amazed that I was only 20. So that's kind of become a running joke amongst them, is that I am, in my 40s, celebrating my 45th birthday, whatever it may be. And I'll make comments like, well, when you guys are my age, and they'll interrupt and say, well, you'll be dead by that time. I'm like, I'm not that much older than you are. But they're just awful at trying to tell age. It's just awful. And then it's a whole lot of work. It's a whole lot of late nights. I mean, typically you're in the gym till like 9:30, and you come home and you got to do homework, you got to study for tests, and you got other stuff you got to do. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of late nights. But I love what I do, and I'm incredibly proud of each one of those kids who comes through that program. And I've been extremely lucky to have really great role models here at King. People that I can kind of draw inspiration from, people that I can emulate when it comes to teaching and when it comes to inspiring the guys that I coach. To name a few, Dr. Fay, who's actually over at Emory Henry now, Dr. Simonson, Dr. KK, Dr. Linderman, Professor Leando, Professor Trainer, Professor Sutherland. As far as professors at King, they've been fantastic, and I can kind of draw inspiration from what they do and how they handle themselves. And then Coach Blythe, who's the head coach over at Tri-Cities, it's been a blessing sitting underneath him and trying to soak up all of his knowledge, all of his basketball knowledge, and how he handles certain situations and how he builds a program. And then my parents for setting the ultimate example, teaching me to keep that standard high when it comes to being around those young men. So before I give you the takeaway, before I give you what I want you all to take away from this, I got a couple pictures I'm going to show you. So this first one is from this past year, and we graduated a lot of seniors after last year. So this was like a young team, or I guess not young, inexperienced team. And this kind of sums up exactly how this year was. It was chaos. It's chaos. They were trying to get a yearbook picture, and this one actually right here is the one who asked the question and immediately was talking about something outside the window. He's funny, but he has a very short attention span. And it's just chaos. With a young team or with an inexperienced team, the highs are really high and the lows are really low. You never know what you're getting on a day-to-day basis. So this kind of sums it up. This was us down at state tournament this year. This one right here is my oldest younger brother. And I had the privilege of coaching him his senior year, which was my first year. And coaching I use that very loosely because there wasn't much that I could tell him that he didn't already know. And I'll never say this again, but he might be a better basketball player than I was. But if he asked, I didn't say that. But I had the privilege of coaching him my first year that I was coaching, and then he actually has joined. He was my assistant JV the first year that I was the head JV coach, and then he actually is helping us on varsity as well. So it's a privilege to actually work with him and actually have coached him. I actually got a chance to coach my other younger brother who is in 8th grade, and I don't have any pictures of that team, but there's one, that was a whole different, I was not prepared to coach 8th graders. They like to argue a lot about nothing. So it was a blessing to get to coach both of them. I consider it a privilege. They might not, but I consider it a privilege to have coached both of them. So that's that one. But this was us down at States. This is us after the championship game. That trophy is silver, and you might be able to tell from those forlorn faces, but we made it to the championship game, again, with a young team. You never know what you're getting. They showed up to the tournament, and they played their hearts out. They played really, really well. Knocked off the 1 seed from the West, which is huge, which is a really good win for them. But got to the championship game. We were up 2 with 6 or 7 seconds left, and the team we were playing drove down, hit a 3 at the buzzer to beat us by 1. So you always hate losing like that. But they left everything out on the floor, which is what you ask for them, which is pretty much all you can ask for them as a coach. So proud of what the progress they've made, the growth they've showed, and what they accomplished down there at the tournament. This was the team that I mentioned I had a lot of seniors on. I think like 6 or 7 seniors that year. This is the second year I was coaching, and they actually dominated conference and stuff, and so they went down to the state tournament, ended up bringing home the state championship. So proud of them and what they accomplished that year. That senior class was actually freshman my senior year, so this was actually the last class that I got that actually played with me, which is good and bad, I guess, because they remember me very differently from when I was playing than I was volatile when I played, I guess is a good way to put it. Then this is the very first year I started. There is the brother, and this was us on our way to states. They were actually favored. They dominated conference as well. They were favored to win the whole thing. Ended up getting upset in the semifinals, but they played well. They left it all on the floor, which is, again, all you can ask for from them. And then this is them at the banquet. I say I'm proud of them a lot because I'm incredibly proud of each and every one of the young men that's come through the program. Everything that they've accomplished, everything that they are accomplishing, and everything that they have accomplished once they've graduated and moved on. So if there's one thing I guess, big takeaway from this is that I want you all to find lessons in everything that you do, even if you don't necessarily enjoy it. You can find lessons from it, and then you can take that and you can apply it to other aspects of your life. So these lessons I've learned from coaching, I try to apply when I'm tutoring. Sometimes not very well, but I do my best to apply them. Coaching has actually kind of directed me towards teaching. So all these lessons that I've learned here, I can actually use when I'm in the classroom and teaching. So find lessons in everything that you do and apply those to other aspects of your life. And so my gift to you all is that I am now done. So it's a relatively short convocation on Monday. But I thank you all. Again, thank you for coming out here and listening. Thank you for the Institute, again, and the professors for giving me this opportunity. And it is an honor. Thank you all for your time.
We thought, should we give him a big check or a plaque? We decided on the plaque. So this is for Noah. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And please join me again in thanking Noah Rosenbalm.